What's up, guys? Welcome back. I'm back. So I was thinking the other day about how much hope I still feel I can reserve for the United States as it approaches its next general election in November. Like, how much faith do I have that the US can emerge from this electoral process as an intact democracy? So I thought, you know what? Let's just do a video about it. Let's talk about this for a minute, shall we? So the problems that the US faces in the run-up to this election are very similar to the problems that any Western liberal democracy are faced with at the moment. These are nations that came up in the 18th, 19th, 20th centuries, largely as a result of colonialism and looting, invasions, and then latterly military dominance. They are countries who, in the Industrial Revolution exploited their working classes, but for whom, through a mixture of different flavors of human rights, have now fallen behind other countries, other economies who do still exploit their working people. So China, for example, has been able to manufacture and produce and grow economically faster than other competing superpowers because, or like by virtue of the fact that they enjoy things like sweatshops and 19-hour work days or whatever. Similarly, you might have also read about the Indian economy, right? It is untempered by the same workers' rights, human rights legislation that some people would argue frustrate our own economic growth over here. So you've got economies like India and China, and then you've got economies like the US and the UK. Like, it helps if you think of it like two farms, right? Two farms, imagine that. They're both being run by brothers, say. And this brother over here, he has his staff on the farm, like the fruit pickers or whatever, and they are all very happy workers. 8-hour days, they get 3 breaks. One of those is a lunch break, an hour off. Meanwhile, over here, this guy runs his farm on slaves, right? And they're forced to work 19-hour days. They get beaten. They get slapped around the face and called lazy dogs or whatever. Now, the first farm is inarguably a nicer place to work. It's just a more pleasant farm. But the second farm, the slavey one, productivity-wise, it's not even close, guys. And so anyway, if we go back to the economies, maybe you think, like maybe you look at India's economy and China's economy and you go like, well, okay, look, I'm fine with not having a 7% growth rate or a 10% growth rate if it means I do have human rights, workers' rights, women's rights. And that's fine, right? Me too. I like having those rights too. But I suppose the issue is that as the population continues to grow, with that population growth comes added cost. And nobody wants to pay any more in taxes, and public services gradually get life gets harder, and gradually more and more people get angrier and angrier about it. Which is how come you end up with so many people like, how come everything's so f***ing now? People see the house that their dad was able to afford on one income at their age, and now they've got like dual income, them and their partner. And they're like, I couldn't even hope to ever afford that. They ask, how come food and taxes and electricity and gas, how come everything is so much more expensive now? And it's like, yeah, because there's more and more people and everything's imported now. And the service-based companies and corporations that do still exist in economies like America and indeed the United Kingdom here, they have to basically find a way of outpacing the macro economy's performance. So where you've got like the UK economy or the US economy like trudging along at like 3%, maybe if it's a real booming year, but like 1% or 2%, these multinational corporations, they have to find a way of generating like 5%, 10%, 15% growth. They got to find a way to outperform the domestic economy. So how do they do that? They jack up the bills, or slashing the services, or taking 25% of the Maltesers in the packet away and keeping the price the same. That is why everything's shit now. That's why you get less for your money, or the services are a bit worse quality, or you can't afford the house that your dad had at your age. It's because the economies like the US and UK are being outperformed manufacturing productivity-wise by places like India and China that don't have workers' rights or equality, legislation, all of that shit. And so the economies have to jack up and then other people slash. Do you understand, right? You still with me? And so anyway, then this confusion and anger at how much better things used to be, paired with our natural penchant to, look at the past with rose tints. Well, that sort of spreads and then manifests as support for figures like, over here it would be Farage and Tice, over in the United States, Donald Trump. Because, rather than having an honest conversation about the end game of capitalism, about how to compassionately manage workers' rights in countries, in economies where it's too expensive to even have babies anymore, rather than having any sort of intellectual conversation that seeks to solve the problems that we're faced with. Instead, they see that sort of golden age nostalgia as a narrative that they can hijack to get themselves into power. And I'm sorry to say, it is absolutely working. Farage is already now an elected member of parliament here in Britain. And despite some of the coverage that you would have seen about Kamala Harris, there is still an excellent chance that Donald Trump is going to end up back in the White House. And if, or perhaps when that happens, I think the only actual improvement you will see as a result of his second presidency will be to the balance sheets of billionaires, which means inequality will grow, poverty will explode, people are going to get more and more desperate, and gradually, glacially, you will start to see the crumbling of civilization as you know it. Have a good afternoon.
Nuclear war and climate change keep raging. The oil's running out, disease keeps changing. There's no hope for anyone, so excuse me for getting drunk. Inflation's